Archaeologists might have discovered the origin of the Philistines. The whole story sounds like something you might have read in the Bible. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. Between 1997 and 2016, researchers at an excavation near Ashkelon in Israel examined the remains of more than 100 humans, remains that dated from the 12th to 6th centuries before Christ. The researchers hoped to find human DNA in order to answer an old question: who were the Philistines? Where do they come from? Well, as it turns out, the Philistines were exactly who the Bible says they were, and they came from where the Bible says they did. Amos 9 speaks of God bringing up the Philistines from Caphtor, just as he brought Israel out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 2 tells us that the Caphtorim, who came from Caphtor, destroyed the original Canaanite inhabitants and settled in their place. Now, all of this brings up the obvious question: where was Caphtor? We just don't know for sure, but the Bible does provide an interesting clue. Jeremiah called the Philistines the remnant of the coastland of Caphtor. The Hebrew word translated coastland can also mean island. For this and other reasons, many archaeologists have concluded that biblical Caphtor was Crete. In fact, some modern Bible translations even render Caphtor as Crete. We can't be completely certain that it is, but the Bible also tells us three other things about the Philistines. First, they weren't native to Iron Age Canaan. Second, they displaced the original inhabitants of the region. And third, they came via the sea, in other words, the Mediterranean. Now, all of this brings me back to the excavation in Ashkelon. After analyzing DNA from the site, Michael Feldman, an archaeogeneticist at the Max Planck Institute, and Daniel Master, the head of the expedition, revealed the results. Master announced, "Our study has shown for the first time that the Philistines immigrated to this region in the 12th century BC. And from where did they immigrate? Well, according to Feldman, this DNA ancestral component is derived from Europe, or to be more specific, from southern Europe. So the ancestors of the Philistines must have traveled across the Mediterranean and arrived in Ashkelon sometime between the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. Over time, that ancestral component became diluted as Philistines mixed with the local Canaanite population. Now, all of this is just about pretty much in accordance with the biblical narrative. The Philistines were ancient Israel's principal antagonist during the period of the Judges, which coincides with the time frame Feldman and Master mention, as well as the early monarchy. But as the biblical narrative continues, they became less distinct from their Canaanite neighbors, and they basically drop out of the picture, except as a historical reference, as in Jeremiah. Now, of course, whenever the latest archaeological evidence confirms part of a biblical narrative, we're told that this does not prove the Bible is true. I suspect what critics are trying to say, for example in this case, is that confirming the biblical narrative's account of the origin of the Philistines doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the Bible is true. Well, of course it doesn't. But the Bible is on quite a streak here, isn't it? And each finding further distinguishes the biblical narrative from other religious or even ancient historical texts. The biblical writers weren't creating myths. They weren't recounting legends. They were relating history. And like all history, the events it describes are interpreted within Israel's larger story. But the events are clearly not created out of thin air to suit their agenda. These were events that were either witnessed or received from reliable sources, which is why we must say that biblical faith is a historical faith. Many other faiths are ways of life or paths to enlightenment or something like that. But the Bible's different. It tells the story of God's dealing with his people as it unfolded in history. Its details are grounded in real events, not in some mythological once upon a time. And along the way, we learn of other actors, like the Philistines. For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.